Hey, it's Denys from Voiceflow. In case you missed it, we have the recording for ROI for your AI with myself, Chip, and Colin. Hope you enjoy, and let's dive into it.
So thank you everybody for joining. I'm Denys. I lead our machine learning team here at Voiceflow. I've been with the company for the past 3 years, so have seen the adventures of Gen AI unfold. Excited to welcome Chip and Colin to our panel today. I'll hand it over first to Chip and then to Colin to introduce themselves.
Hey, my name is Chip. I'm VP of AI and open source at Voltron Data. So we work on building GPU native query engines, and we also contribute to a lot of open source projects, including Apache Arrow, Ibis, and Substrate. Very excited to be here today.
My name is Colin Guilfoyle. I'm the SVP of customer service in Trilogy, which is a private equity company. We have about 90 products under our management. And so I manage the CS team providing CS services on those 90 products, and then some other AI stuff as well, as we've kind of gotten more into being AI first as a company.
Thank you for introducing yourselves. Let's check out who's here. So we had some intros in the chat here, but we also have some pretty interesting companies and sectors joining us, or attendees from these companies. So I think this just shows how much people think about the cost of AI, budgeting, and ROI. We have healthcare, banking, sort of core tech, insurance, telecom. So a lot of really interesting conversations, I think, that we'll have today, and we'll try to touch on examples from different industries. So for our agenda today, we'll go through sort of four key pillars here. In the pillars, we'll talk about the first project and experimentation, sort of how to get started with Gen AI and budget that first project. Then we'll focus on the growth side, so growth and hiring. Then we saw quite a few questions from the group about model choices and RAG. We'll finish off with the budgeting side on hardware, so compute and GPU. And finally, round it up with some big takeaways. So for these kinds of events, we love to make sure that we cover the topics you're interested in. So quite a few list of interesting topics here that the group has submitted. We sort of put those out under these different categories, and we'll make sure to touch upon each of them. So to get started with the first project component here, maybe I'll pass it over to Colin to get started. So maybe talk a little bit about your first Gen AI project that you worked on and managed, and tell us a little bit about
that. Sure. So we, in Trilogy, went with AI fairly early on, but kind of the first major project that I would consider like project that went to production was actually with yourselves. So because we manage 90 products and we're trying to be kind of standardized, but at the same time to do a first initial concept, we picked one of our carrier products, which is a firewall, and we decided to transition from the provider we had, which was Forethought, which was just a kind of fairly basic AI assisted knowledge-based search. And we went to trying to actually replace agents and kind of time on tickets and fully resolve tickets within chat. And we did that via Voiceflow. We kind of approached it from, like, we are big on data and we had a lot of information there. So we took the tickets for the last chat and tickets for the last, I think, 3 months, aggregated out what the commonalities were. And basically, once we were able to address 30% of the tickets fully by AI, we went live. Ironically, the first intended one was to use it for voice, but we very quickly pivoted and deployed it via chat. And we only recently actually deployed voice because the chat kept us so busy. But yeah, that was kind of the first project. It was strange. We tend to deploy very quickly and then iterate even quicker. We found that no amount of testing of an AI in a local environment was kind of enough. We had to actually deploy it and get customer interactions, because it was only then, as with anything, that you actually saw what people were doing and what they were interacting. We were testing going, here's the problem I'd have. And we were being very specific because most of us are engineers. So we were like, here's the logs, here's the error I'm getting. And what happened was when we deployed it in the wild, people would just say computer broke. And, figure out the rest from that. And so it was very much, the first project was, iterated out, but the results were super fast. Kind of found we deployed, I think, in 3 products in the first 2 weeks, and we went to all 90 products within, I think it was 2 months.
I think that's a pretty interesting metric of trying to get 30% automation before going live. And I think a lot of us have felt that in the machine learning space of you have your training data, you sort of validate, prototype, and then you go live, and then what your customers say or what real world data looks like is completely different. So I think it's an important journey that all of us face, and sometimes we forget it. It's almost like you do one project and you hope that next time the data will be better, but it's not. So really important item to keep in mind. I guess over to you, Chip. You've started a company a couple of years ago, sold it, joined Voltron. Maybe you can share a little bit about your experience of sort of running a startup project, having this idea, and sort of how you budgeted and tried to build the startup. So I think there's a lot of people in the audience interested about that.
Hey, yeah, so I think I'm pretty lucky that I think I get to see AI application at different level. So at one level, I do advise a few startups. So I do get to get involved. So of course, it is advising. Sometimes you don't get very hands-on, but sometimes I try to be very hands-on with certain projects that I find very interesting. So I get to see them developing just from my prototyping to productions, getting feedback, and a couple of the companies that I'm pretty involved with has recently launched their project, and in a way it's similar to Colin, as in I'm very interested in beyond just text. So I see that a lot of people are using LLMs for text-based, but I do think that the future is multimodal. So I'm especially focusing on applications when not just not just the input is multimodal. So for example, on projects that I'm actually helping a company with is trying to convert from screenshot to code. So you just need, it's quite challenging, the evaluations. Another, I'm so interested in outputs that is multimodal. So for chat, right, you just use a text, conversations, ability. But if you want to do 3D, you have to do voice, visual, facial expressions, action generations. And this has been a big challenge because one thing, there are not quite a lot of evaluations, benchmarks for those. If you look for things like role-playing benchmarks, it's almost none. There are a few coming mostly from China. I think that China is getting it. I don't know why, but I think all the benchmark I find on role-playing is from China. So I think on the aspect of our application side, the other is I also help a few companies building platforms, like fine-tuning platform. So I do test out the platform for them. So I'm experimenting with how to fine-tune a project. And I think it's a budget in case of time, how much time we have for this, but also money, do we have data, how much money we can allocate to data creations, how much money to API calls, and then how much money for evaluations, because if we do AI as a judge, it can be quite costly as well. So that's where I am.
Yeah, for sure. I think that cost of trying to estimate how much the project costs for LLMs is something that everybody thinks about, whether you're running evaluation data sets, synthetic data generation, something that's really important. We can probably talk about that a little bit more in our growth stage. Since launching the first project, you might just want to pick a cheap model, pick Haiku or ChatGPT or Llama, launch that project and then see what works. But I think different companies have different risk thresholds. So in Colin's case, automate 30%, let's get into production. Other companies want to do a lot more evaluation. So I think a lot of great points there for getting started. Maybe let's move on to the second component here, talking about the growth stage. So transitioning into that growth stage of iterating through products, improving your existing ones. Within Voiceflow, we try to take this framework into account. We call this the crawl, walk, run framework. Not super unique, but in the case of conversational AI, conversational design, the general idea here is that you want to start with something simple, start with one assistant. In the case of Colin, I think it was 3 assistants, get that working as a minimum viable product, and then slowly layer things on and scale. And if you do that right at the beginning, you'll actually find that your cost of ownership will remain fairly flat because you've built out the patterns, built out the tools to do so. So I think that's something that's really important. And on the team side, people know how to build an additional agent, the best practices, you have playbooks to follow. So very interesting area is once you go from 0 to 1, it's a question of 1 to 5. And even after that, if you have 90 assistants, I guess managing that is quite different as well. So I guess maybe on that business growth topic, heading back to you, Colin, how do you manage 90 assistants in production? What does that look like?
So we tend to have the way our teams are built. We have the SVP and VP team, and then we have what we call our conductor team, which are like very code heavy senior product guys. And so we kind of made them what we call DRIs, directly responsible individuals. So we gave them each a subset of the products to analyze each week the results coming in. I mean, Voiceflow and chat is one element of it. Like we have at this stage, we've kind of stacked a lot on top of that. So we just call our system Atlas at this point. And so basically Atlas is a suite of tooling and automations that allow us to automate both tickets and chat interactions, so we can reuse both. So with the DRIs, they were working on automations and AI kind of training and building the right RAGs and the right tools to allow us to solve more and more of that specific product's issues. And then we have some smaller products as well, like not all 90 are not massive beasts, some are much kind of smaller, maybe end of life products. So for those, we had one DRI who's responsible for basically keeping it at a base level that it can do the basics right, the KB searches, the outage detection, the ticket raising, the what we call the L2 troubleshooting. So basically troubleshooting using past tickets as well as knowledge base and access to the code and logs. So basically that's how we kind of kept it together. We had DRIs that would be responsible for a specific subset, and then VPs sitting above them who would be responsible for groups of those. We're kind of separated into BUs. So different products, different types of products go to different BUs. And so the VPs would be responsible for maybe 2 BUs, kind of 2 use cases. And then the DRIs would be responsible underneath them for the individual kind of metrics, making sure everything is being worked on. I think for us, initially the goal was 30%. I think by the month 3, we were at 50%. We're currently trending towards 65%. Either this week or next week, we'll hit our quarterly goal a month early, which is nice. But that iterative gain from here is tougher. Like we got the low hanging fruit with the 30%. We got the slightly higher fruit, I guess it is, for the last couple of months. And now it's very, very detailed. We're trying to replace L2 troubleshooting, which is exceptionally difficult. We're trying to automate making changes in the system securely so that when a customer is looking for something to be done, that it can be done that way. So yeah, that's kind of how we've grown it. It's to make sure there's always somebody iteratively improving it each week and tracking that improvement.
Yeah, that's very detailed. Really appreciate that structure of the team. I think a number of people are wondering about that is sort of how do you structure that team so that EVP, SVP, then VP by business unit, and then every sort of project manager, product manager under that responsible for project. I think that's a very powerful concept for teams that are scaling and growing. I guess over to you, Chip, about figuring out how to know when to hire somebody else. So in the case of Colin's org, there's people already there. It's a reasonably sized team. In a startup, you don't always have a lot of money and you want to prioritize things. Sort of, how do you do that? How do you figure?
Hey, so I'm not sure it's just me because it was a little bit of a cutout. So I think my understanding is that the question is, how do I decide when to hire? I think the question is pretty much the same. Like whether it's AI or not AI, like we hire when we realize it's like the lack of this role is causing us it's not having this growth, like it's a bottleneck to our growth. So maybe like one question specifically is the recently on the community came to me and said like, hey, should we bring our labeling in-house, or like should we like, because they've been like sourcing the labeling outside is like very expensive. So I was thinking like, okay, like depending, so like, so it's a question of like whether it's like how much like labeling needs do you have in the futures, and also how much time it takes for you to like ramp up the in-house, and also like with the return investment for that might look like, and also understanding the challenges of like building an internal like labeling in-house. So people think of labeling, it's just like, okay, here is a guideline, here's a labeling, but especially for a lot of AI, like especially from complex stuff, it can be very hard to like create a guideline and then hiring qualified people to do that. So it's a lot of operational challenges. So like if you want to bring that in-house, you have to take on the operational challenge to manage and hire the team. Yeah, so I think we just like hire when is an issue of like talent needed. Also another team so just came to me like, do we want to bring like research in-house? So I think a lot of AI companies want to build their own model. It's like, okay, we want to build this AI research lab. And I usually want people to not like have an in-house research team because it's actually very expensive to maintain. And I know that a lot of people want to publish papers like at the conferences, but it's quite a lot of work, like publishing papers. So like actually a discussion we had recently is like, hey, we know this conference is great, and usually traditionally we have had a lot of success hiring from the conference, right? So let's try to write a paper and publish this like high-profile conference and have us hire. But like the thing is that you can spend a lot of time writing a paper, and you don't know for sure that paper won't get accepted. So that's so like yes, like before we think about like bringing on like hiring researchers, we just need to think about just like what do we want to get out from it and what's the cost.
Those are some really great points. I think on the data labeling side, I think yesterday there is a tweet about the CTO of Databricks still spending 15 minutes a day labeling data. So that's pretty interesting, is that the value of having good labeled data is so high that some of the most senior folks in companies are still spending time on it. But for a long tail of certain data, there's certainly a high operational cost of maintaining that. And at that point, it's a question of, are your data sets worthwhile to create in-house, or buy them, or pay a company externally to do that? Because for specific domain use cases, data can become a bottleneck. Touching on the second part about research teams, I think that's super interesting. I think at the beginning, when large language models were sort of going more mainstream, so the first Llama model came out, Databricks was training model, Bloomberg was training models, I think a couple more JPMC. That was seen as a path forward, but a lot of companies right now are just fine-tuning a lot of open source models. So I think that's a good approach. And there's a lot more services now that let you do that if you have well-labeled data. So I think for a lot of people who are thinking about fine-tuning their own models, I think it's a great approach and better than training from scratch, but still a lot of challenges there and maybe beyond the scope of this conversation. But really important things to think about as you scale and figure out making that decision between your own models and external models. Yeah, so I think to wrap up this topic, to Colin's earlier point, talking about some of Trilogy's growth, so giving that 90 set of product lines and getting that automation up to 60, sounding like 65% now. Pretty interesting milestone there, just what's possible. And I think getting that last 20% is going to be quite the challenge, because people are saying interesting things to your chatbot or to your assistant, and you need to know how to manage that. So I guess, Colin, going back to you about the tools that you're using. So obviously using Voiceflow, but maybe can you break down some other tools that you're using and a rough cost estimate per set of tools?
Sure. Costing tools is a bit difficult because, I mean, we're pretty much in an AWS environment, and, spread kind of, we're a tech company, so we're spread kind of across many different pools of resources. In terms of other tools, so Atlas is a core structure, most of it. So our ticketing system is Zendesk. That shouldn't be taken as an endorsement for their amazing AI abilities. It's just our ticketing system, which has an API in it that we use to put tickets through. We have basically using lambdas through AWS, we code in based on triggers. So for the chat, obviously it comes in via Voiceflow. For tickets themselves, they come in, they go into a Lambda, which basically its first port of call is what we call Atlas Ticket. That has a knowledge base of the types of problems that we solve, and it has a knowledge base of what we need to solve those problems. And so what it does first is it categorizes the issue, kind of checks to see if we have enough information, because again, of those customers just saying computer broken, and it iterates through those, gets the information we need from the customer, extracts it, and then tries to solve it. And for solving wise, we have at the moment basically built two L2 troubleshooting bots. One is a kind of chain prompt that is using past tickets, KBAs, log analysis. As I said, it goes very, very deep. I mean, the L2 bot on that side can take anything up to, I think, 12 minutes to fully go through its process and come back with an answer. We have a second L2 bot, which is more streamlined. Again, it has access to the tickets and the knowledge base, but it doesn't do much else, but it's quicker. And so we pool those two answers together. And then we have another AI who we've called Enki. And Enki basically reads the two L2 submissions, picks which one is better. If neither of them are good enough, it then sends it for an agent to work. So we've kind of, everything's based around Lambdas, some databases, and yeah, basically there's a kind of obviously an AI first database in the background with all the ticket information from the past. That's something we found was quite a learning curve. So we were always very good at documenting in tickets as a kind of a process, because we're a 24/7 operation. Anyone can be picking up a ticket. But there was always a lot of information in there that was only necessary for a human agent. And so one of the things we've had to do, spend a lot of time doing, is stripping out that information that was really useful for a human, but is absolutely confusing for an AI. I mean, in our earlier days, it was coming back with an answer that was basically just a summary of, an internal process that somebody followed to close the ticket, not the actual how the ticket was closed. So yeah, from our perspective, we spend easily, I think the spend is well over 100K on AWS a year, considerably more, I think. And we use OpenAI, we use Anthropic. We don't really use Gemini, but it is there. But we would spend, again, well over 100K on OpenAI alone per year in terms of tokens and stuff. So it's quite substantial spend there. We obviously spend a few dollars on Voiceflow as well. And other than that, we also have an experimentation budget, which we kind of bring in products just to test them. We'll take them for either a year or a couple of months, see if they're useful, see if they can do the job. If they can't, we just move on to the next one. But that's kind of where the budget mostly goes. I'd say if the two highest things would be AWS and OpenAI.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think really important things to call out is that you need multiple services to build your solution, especially when you're in production. Things can be quite pricey, but even combining all those costs together, there's still obviously some cost savings there. I think the problem you brought up in terms of large language models and humans needing different information is super interesting. I think we found something similar, is that certain pieces of context are fairly quote unquote called distracting to a large language model. I guess, Chip, you've done a decent amount of human evaluation, LM evaluation. Have you seen any similar kinds of patterns?
When I say human evaluations, patterns like the cost patterns, or what do you mean?
So you had that blog post about like the LLM arena evaluations and people picking certain prompts versus LLM-based evaluations. Have you seen any similar patterns between sort of how LLMs evaluate versus how people evaluate responses?
Yeah, so actually I also was about to ask Colin about that. I think so Colin, did you mention that you have an AI to pick out the better response of the two models? Like one of them is stronger and one is weaker. Why do you need that?
It's from a BU perspective. So obviously we have our customers as in the customers of the products, but we also have the BU kind of customers as well. And we need to basically prove that what we're sending is accurate. So we would always have had a QC model where like somebody would read it and kind of verify it. And so we basically, we implemented the same as well, because we have two completely different L2 models, as in, not models as in just the LLM, but how it troubleshoots is completely different. So for our perspective, it's really useful to have data as to which one is providing more accurate answers. Ironically, what we found up until recently, at least, is that the simpler one was giving better answers. And so for us, it's to focus those DRIs who are responsible for those L2 bots troubleshooting wise, that they would do make good decisions. And as well, if, for example, as I said, with the data that's in the tickets, I mean, if we're getting poor quality data in, it would be, so all our products are kind of fairly technical. We're talking telco products and stuff that are used kind of by large corporates. So for us to make a mistake and send something that might not be great out is not acceptable. So the kind of Enki is our last line of defense to make sure that whatever's being sent out is at least useful.
But Enki is AI, so basically you're trusting AI to evaluate. And it seems like from, Oh, interesting. How, so and the simple model is better, like maybe most of the time?
Yeah. I'm not going to put pressure on the guy who is responsible for the more complex one. He's getting slightly more correct, and it is improving. But from our perspective, it was just interesting. We gave it all this extra tooling. It costs a lot more to run per iteration, and it wasn't delivering that much more. And so it made that we had to focus and go, okay, why isn't it, and how can we fix it? And so that's kind of where it is.
Yeah, so I think like using AI to evaluate, I see it's like very common nowadays. It's like probably the fastest growing evaluation method in production. Mostly just no other way to do it, right? I think at LinkedIn recently they have a blog post and they just have like humans like every day annotate 500, and that is their like North Star like metrics, like to see if their models are improving. But other than that, you just need to like rely on usually you just have to rely on AI. And I see this like AI also has a lot of biases, the ways that humans do. So one thing is like without clear guideline, I don't think AI judges will work. So I felt like I was seeing a lot of problem because AI judges like really point on like what model is being used and like what prompt is being used. And I just went through like a bunch of public, like you have like on this kind of like evaluation tools, and they provide this like here's a faithfulness, here's coherence, and they have the prompts for those. And I went through those prompts just yesterday, and they are all very different, and none of them are like very good. Some of them are extremely verbal. So I was like, oh my god, if we use this kind of like prompts, it would cost us like a lot of money. So I think it's like you just have very clear guideline. If humans disagree on the guideline, I don't think AI will pick up either. I think there's some weird things. For example, like say like, oh, AI is very bad at numerical scores. So say that people have somehow converged to like, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is usually like the kind of scores that AI can do reasonably well. But AI has been like empirical, have been pretty bad at continuous score. Like if you want to ask like, hey, between 0 and 1, like output the value, is pretty bad at that. So I saw Mistral example when it says like, hey, you can ask AI to like put the confidence score. And I was like, why is Mistral showing this example? Because it thought that like AI is just not good at like outputting from 0 to 1. So I don't know. So maybe there's some special, like if people have tried it out, I would love to see if people have found like consistent numerical scores from AI. There's some different kind of like biases where humans judges and AI judges have shown to be different. So for example, like humans have like a recency bias, right? So we remember what is last, and we tend to give it high score, but we have found that like AI tend to like prefer the first, like whatever the first option is usually get the higher score. But at the same time, it's been different with Lemma 3. Like we have found the Lemma 3 information was the bottom is somehow, I think I just saw someone tweet like last week, so I haven't validated it yet. So it seems like it could change with the models as well, like recency bias or like the top or the bottom of the prompts is taken into account more. So I think AI as a judge is a very interesting approach, and still a lot of work to be done to understand how to use it well.
Yeah, a lot of great insights there and details. I think bringing that back to the ROI side, I think it's really important for people to understand what's your budget per evaluation, because you can put a massive context window into GPT-4 or Claude Opus or one of the expensive but powerful models, and you'd be spending a couple of dollars per interaction, which isn't ideal. I think this is a really important topic to be aware of, is that improving your prompt might improve performance by some cases 1%, some cases 5%, some cases 10%, sometimes negative. At Voiceflow, we've done some research on that, but sometimes it works. I think I was reading about, there was a medical benchmark data set, and some folks use DSPY to optimize a prompt. DSPY is a framework for optimizing, generating prompts, and they found that a 6,000 token prompt was most effective, but that would be very expensive for some of these models. So really important to figure out how you're evaluating your models, which models you're using, how big are your prompts, how many examples are you using. It's, I think, an active area of research and applied research, and something that we'll continue to see. But from a business perspective, I think just knowing to ask that question is, what is 1 percentage point of accuracy worth? And it'll definitely depend on the use case. Okay, so this goes nicely into model choice and RAG. So this is, I guess, in this area, we want to focus a little bit about what kind of models have people used before, which ones work for different use cases, and maybe talking a little bit about the economics of RAG. So I know Colin, Trilogy uses RAG quite consistently. What kind of insights have you found with your agents and assistants?
It's, for us, we've had mixed results. I think how we split the data out and stuff has been the kind of the most complex thing to try and kind of at least reliably search. From our perspective, what has been clear is it moves and it changes. So we've had really good results from a RAG that we built with a model of, like, for example, we had created a RAG on some of our code base, and then took in some other programming documentations from an engineering side, and then we were checking to see answers. And for the first, whatever model we used at first, I think it would have been one of the 4 turbos. We got great results, we were getting great answers, and it very quickly just went off on a tangent and was no longer useful to us. So we have kind of, from that perspective, our focus is more on the models than the RAGs that we're using to search at this stage. We just kind of take the tickets in as much as we can. You know, once we have an index that we can search, we pull the ticket in as much as we can in full, so that we have the full context in what we're doing. Model wise, when Claude 3 came out, we found weirdly that the middle model, which I can never remember the name of, but basically the most advanced model, was actually, it wasn't giving us the information we wanted. It was terrible, to be honest. Whereas the middle model was actually much more kind of robust and giving more accurate answers. So yeah, from us, it's still, where model is predominantly 4 turbo, you know, the latest one. For some of the Atlas ticket work, still the classification is easier and better, and kind of 3.5, you know, the lower models. It seems to be more accurate. It's not as creative, which maybe is what you need at that stage of the puzzle. So we actually, oftentimes, it'll be different models called along the process. But yeah, from our perspective, it's, for the most part, we'll just use whatever's the newest and move with it, because generally speaking, it will give better results.
Nice. It's actually very interesting to hear. So we have Opus as the most expensive Claude 3 model.
There you go.
Colin's been using Sonnet, which is the middle one, and ChatGPT 3.5. I think with some of the work I've been doing with classification tasks with large language models, we've actually found that GPT-4 generally is quite good, but there are cases when ChatGPT outperforms it. I think one benchmark I ran, Haiku did the best, which is the cheapest model. So very, very interesting area to continue to figure out. And as part of that, it gets pretty challenging to manage all these models and prompts. So I think as teams scale, also figuring out how to manage that. I guess Chip on your end, models, reg, what kind of data experiments have you done to figure out what's best?
So I think this is bringing me to questions because I've seen a lot of people complaining. It's like, oh, hey, GPT-4 is getting worse over time. And I thought it's like, okay, imagine you're OpenAI, right? Would you intentionally put out models? It's just like worse over time. Like, of course, like minus on this thing about safety alignments, like you don't want people to process bad responses, like censorship whatsoever, right? Actually, I wonder if it's like it's also questions of like OpenAI has a lot of different use case in GPT-4. So maybe when they evaluate, they just like evaluate on a set of like I don't know how many test sets or how many tasks they evaluate on and just launch the best model overall. But like so that means that for some of the tasks, like the model might be like really a lot better, but some other tasks you just don't. Like maybe the model is like getting worse. So maybe we hear a lot of people complain about GPT-4 getting worse could just be the people who are on the subset of the task because if the model is performing well, we pretty don't hear people complaining. So this thing is like so maybe it's even highlights the importance of like you just can't just take like on the leaderboard like or on this like reported supposedly best models at face value. We just need to do a lot of time evaluating these models. And also I see like another like things like when evaluating models is that sometimes it could just be maybe you're just not good at prompt engineering. Like, you know, like I've seen just like for some of the use case I tried. Like for some use case I could try like for weeks. I still couldn't get like really good performance. But for some, I was like, oh, I just changed the prompts a little bit, and like the performance like go from unusable to complete like really pretty good. So sometimes I'm not sure like when a company say, oh, this model sucks for us, and it's like we want to like how good as a prompt, you know, like how good as a data you're feeding into the system. So it's really tricky.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's an ongoing problem. I think had attendee share their experience with Claude as well, being quite well, and highlighting the importance of different syntax as well. So I think that this topic will continue to evolve as we go through. People still figuring out which models are best to use, and the challenge again there to Colin's point as well, that the versions really matter. So it's not just the model, is that which version of the model that you're using. So. All right. Another topic, I think we'll pass this over to you, Chip, about compute and GPU. I know you've done quite a lot of work on this. One of the products that you were working on sort of showcased the importance of using GPU for a lot of big data handling. Maybe you can share a little bit about that, and also just for AI use cases, like how do you deal with GPU costs? How do you estimate them? How do you choose a specific GPU type? Would be great to get your insights there.
So yeah, thanks for Denys for showing this. So this is a benchmark that Voltron Data released recently. So basically it showed that like at a certain data scale, when you move from Spark to TCS. So Spark here we run it on CPU, and TCS we run it on GPU. We can see just like the cost and the cost and the runtime both significantly lower. So I think it's like one thing about GPUs is that I think GPUs are just gonna be here to stay. I don't think we're gonna go back to like less powerful computers. Historically, I have never seen that happen. So I think it's like so a lot of people today use GPUs for like training and inference, but I also see there's like a big category of like workloads that people are just not using GPU for, which is data processing, like ETL work. And there are a lot of, like up until very recently, there was a huge GPU shortage. And so people was like, okay, we don't have enough like GPUs for like training and inference. Like who has GPUs for doing other stuff? But I'm not sure how people here think about it. But I think just like that might change, or it's already changing. I'm not sure like anyone here has tried to acquire a lot of like GPUs recently. I think it's pretty funny in the last couple of years. You can see like startups pitch deck is like literally is a competitive advantage. It's just like they have access to GPUs. And I think I was talking to the VCs recently, and they were asking me like, what point do you think that having access to GPU will stop being a competitive advantage? I feel like coming from NVIDIA, I'm very bullish on GPUs, but I do also think that like the production of GPUs is also like pretty fast, like ramping up pretty fast. So I don't think access to like GPUs is gonna be as much of a problem that it was maybe like just a year ago. And we see a lot of people like providing GPUs for cheap. Anyway, sorry, what's the question?
Just talking about choosing a right GPU for a use case. Like, does it even make sense to use a GPU? When does it make sense? Or should people keep calling proprietary models and sort of using a serverless approach there?
I think it's like GPUs. I think it's like very depends on what models you run. Like if like smaller models, you have a lot of like options. So I think one idea I think is like is very important is that what people call a hardware lottery. So like some models get popular not just because the models are good, but just because they fit the hardware. And like hardware GPU today is like what is 16 gigabyte RAM, 24 gigabyte RAM, like 80 gigabyte RAM. I can see that like the model size and number of parameters can like just make it just enough to run on like certain hardware. So I think like smaller model, you have a lot of choices, but you have like bigger model, you just need to like shower money for bigger machines. And I think this one question we usually ask that I hear a lot is just like what like if you do training, then I hear that. But inference, like is there any point to get like much more powerful machines to run inference? For example, like H100, right? People say, okay, it's pretty an overkill to like use H100 to run a certain like 7 billion model inference. But so it's really depends on like how good can you like at optimizing the model like inference, like can you batch queries? Like I don't think it makes sense you just like use a H100 and just serve one query at a time. But if you can batch queries, right? And if you can do it like more efficiently, then maybe it's worth it to like go with bigger models. So I think it's another point of like people ask like, hey, should I host model or should I use an inference service? Like it's just a lot of work getting into like hosting a model and like optimize for your inference service, like getting it like streaming, batching, doing guardrails, or yeah, it's just a lot of work like making inference service run efficiently. So maybe that could be like something some team should keep in mind if they think about hosting their own models.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's a few questions about that, and people often forget about how much it costs to pay people, right? So if you have an engineer working on optimizing a model, that will cost you at least $1,000 a day, probably, if you're in the US. And the question is, how many API requests can you deal with that? I think my perspective on the topic is generally try to use a third-party hosted solution. It's somebody's business that they focus on. Right now, the rates are pretty cheap, actually. They've fallen, I think, over 600 times since GPT-3 was out with that initial rate. So for most scales, I think third-party makes sense. If you get to a certain scale, then hiring your own team and running it will probably start to make sense. But for most people in the room and the use cases we're talking about, try to avoid that complexity. And if you do want to run your models, many times you can use smaller models, something we do at Voiceflow, and we actually run them on CPUs. So yeah, not always necessary to get the biggest and shiniest GPUs. Yeah, third-party APIs do quite well. So have around 12 minutes remaining. So maybe from each of our speakers, maybe just a summary, something you want the audience to take away, and then we'll dive into Q&A. So I'll start off with Colin, sort of on this topic of budgeting, AI costs, etc. Sort of, what's a word of wisdom you'd give to our audience?
On budgeting, for us, the important thing has been having a budget to just test and roll out. So to actually have something where we can, and we're lucky, I suppose. The atmosphere in Trilogy has been from the very start AI first. So we have a lot of kind of backup from those on high and those who kind of approve budgets that we need to be spending and investing in AI. And what we've found kind of twofold. One, we invest in the actual people who work here, so everybody is obliged almost to spend 2.5 hours a week minimum on Twitter, on kind of LinkedIn, on Reddit, learning and kind of evaluating, kind of upskilling in AI. And we found that that has been immensely kind of helpful, and that has a budgeting impact, because obviously that's like 2.5 hours they're not working tickets. And when I say working tickets, that's just for the L1s and L2s. This is all the way up the top, where I'm the same, everybody above me is the same. So I think actually investing a bit of time and making sure that the people are kind of getting up to speed in AI and adapting to it, and then having a budget to, as I said, to experiment. So, I mean, as I've said already at the start, we use Voiceflow. It's probably one of the reasons, I'm here, is, we deployed it. But we still evaluate competitors to Voiceflow pretty much every other week, for two reasons. One, to see what's out there and maybe push yourself or Derek an email and go, why doesn't yours do this? Or because we know we're going to get questioned on it from on high, So in other words, oftentimes we'll get posted, like we'll get a message saying, hey, I saw this on Twitter. I can give an example, I suppose. We get a lot of posts like, Intercom. Why are you using Zendesk when you could be using Intercom? And we are able to say, well, actually, we've evaluated it. We can give you a long list of reasons why we don't, use it. And so having that ability, that kind of scope there to go out, experiment, buy in software if we need it, or rent it or whatever, but just to be able to kind of push each time and test. So from our perspective, it's having an experimentation budget and having a budget to actually let our guys get up to speed and the time to get up to speed.
I think AI is interesting. As it's like a lot of company I've seen that's enterprise that don't want to invest in things unless it knows their returns. But sometimes, like for emerging technologies, maybe the returns is not quite clear. And sometimes if it's just forced enterprise, like companies just take a little bit more risk, just be willing to because another risk, actually an interesting thing that I saw, I'm not sure which company did that research, but like 7% of companies chose AI because there was like existential risk, because they believe that they don't choose AI, they're gonna die because they're gonna be replaced by another company that uses AI. So I do think that it's not quite clear the returns, but sometimes you just need to make some judgments on whether it's worth investing in. Also, I also think it's like what people call is like evaluations driven development. So in software engineering, we have a test driven development, right? Like when you write the test cases first before you write the code. And I think like for AI applications, we just need to do the same. Like sometimes you just need to write evaluation first before even try to develop the applications. So for example, I just need to start with hey, what is a good response is going to look like? What is a bad response look like? Be very clear on what it is and what success look like. Like what success, for example, for Colin, maybe the number of tickets you can automate. But what would success could look like from the beginning before we go in. But also keep in mind that this is sort of story of searching for the key. There's a lamppost, right? Because we see that somebody lost a key and they search for under the lamppost because it's just this light there. So I do think it's ROI focused development is very similar. Like sometimes we develop applications, not because it's maybe the most impactful, but just because it's the easiest one for us to measure ROI. And which means that we're just missing out on a potentially application can be very impactful down the line, but we just can't have a clear way to evaluate returns from the beginning.
For sure. A lot of great stuff there. We'll definitely agree with both of you. Chip, I definitely agree. Enterprises should be willing to take on a little bit of risk there, have some budget to play around, and also think about what the most important problem is, even though it's not always the easiest one to solve. And Colin, 100% agree. Need to continuously evaluate things. I think even internally for us, when we're using vendors or thinking about our own product, thinking are we solving problems the best? And I think right now is a great time to shake things up in the industry as sort of these cool new models are coming out, technologies are coming out, always being willing to evaluate new tools. And I think if you as a company have a great product and have a great relationship in being responsive and adding features, you'd be happy for your customers to do that. So I think when we're working with Colin and his team, it's great to see him constantly pushing and asking those kinds of questions, because it forces the product to be better. So I think that's a really great mindset, really great way to build a good user experience. So we have 5 minutes left. Just wanted to wrap up on some Q&A. I think we've answered most of the questions here. Jean asked about the inflection point about using your own model versus third-party API. I think that inflection point is pretty far along. Like at Voiceflow, we also have a similar budget for large language models, sort of in the tens of thousands. For that, it's still not worth it to run our own models. So it's pretty expensive. It takes up time. So I think definitely more than that. Question about the resolution chart for the Trilogy use case. Let's go back to that right here. So the horizontal axis is time here. So from week 1 to 19. And then the y-axis is that resolution rate. So
yeah, and just to kind of clarify, that's resolution 100% by AI. We also have AI assisted or co-pilot, but we don't track that in this chart.
Yeah, great addition there. Thanks for the detail, Colin. Other item there. Okay, another question about local hosting versus compute. All right. So we have a few minutes left. I think the last thing for us to mention here for this event is that we will be sending out a spreadsheet to everybody based on this event. The spreadsheet will be based on cost estimations for RAG, one of the topics we talked about, costs of using different models, sort of getting into those use cases. So we do want to leave you with a small tangible item to talk about. So we're going to send that link. It's going to be a Google Sheet. You can copy it, play around with it. If you have any questions, reach out to myself or the Voiceflow team. We can walk you through it, go through a session. But otherwise, really appreciate everybody joining us here today. Big thank you to the panelists. Thank you, Chip and Colin. Really appreciated that discussion, talking about business, talking about tech, diving into the details. It's been a great session, and thank you everybody for joining and asking your questions. We're really interested to hear how this topic continues to evolve. So keep in touch and keep asking those good questions about ROI and budgeting. So thank you everybody, and we'll see you on our next panel.